She told her parents I was her boyfriend on a bright Sunday afternoon, with sunlight spilling across her living room floor and the smell of cardamom tea drifting through the air. And the worst part wasn't the lie. The worst part was the way she looked at me when she said it, as if she was hoping it would become true. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the kind of love that grows from the most unexpected places, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. You never know whose heart might be healed because you decided to spread a little light today. Her name was Ariba Hossein, and she had a smile that looked like it had survived storms. I met her on an ordinary Tuesday morning at a community literacy event in the city park. The sun was high, children were running across the grass, and volunteers were setting up folding tables stacked with donated books. I was there because my boss had suggested I do something meaningful for once. She was there because she always did something meaningful. She was arguing gently with a little boy who insisted he hated reading. Instead of correcting him, she sat cross-legged on the grass and asked him what he loved. Dinosaurs, he said. She handed him a book about prehistoric creatures and told him he wasn't bad at reading, he just hadn't found the right story yet. There was no performance in her kindness. It was simple, steady, and unannounced. I don't know when she noticed me watching, but she looked up and caught my eyes. Instead of looking away, she smiled and waved me over like we were already friends. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other at the same volunteer events. It became a routine. I would carry heavy boxes, she would organize them. I would make awkward jokes, she would laugh too sincerely. Our conversations were easy in the way that feels rare as an adult. No pretending. No rehearsed lines. Just sunlight, shared coffee from paper cups, and stories about how neither of us had quite figured life out yet. Ariba lived with her parents in a quiet neighborhood filled with flowering trees and narrow streets where afternoon light pooled like honey. She had graduated with a degree in sociology but hadn't found the career she wanted yet. I worked in a small design firm that felt more like a waiting room than a dream. We were both in between people, standing in the space between who we had been and who we hoped to become. One Saturday afternoon, she called me in a panic. Her voice trembled, not dramatically, but like someone trying to keep it steady. Her parents had started asking questions about her future, about marriage, about stability, about the right time. An old family friend had mentioned a potential proposal. Everything was moving too fast, and she wasn't ready. I just need some time, she said, though it sounded like she was asking the universe for permission to breathe. I didn't think much of it until the following Sunday when she invited me over for tea. She didn't explain why. I assumed it was casual. I wore a clean shirt, combed my hair, and brought a small box of sweets as a polite gesture. Her house was warm and filled with daylight. Family photographs lined the walls, graduations, weddings, vacations by the sea. Her mother greeted me kindly. Her father studied me with the careful gaze of a man who measured the weight of intentions. We sat together in the living room, teacups balanced on delicate saucers. The air felt heavier than usual, like something unspoken was pressing against it. Then Ariba cleared her throat. She told them I was her boyfriend. The word landed in the room with a quiet thud. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. But she reached for my hand under the table, her fingers cold and trembling, and I understood. It wasn't mischief. It wasn't manipulation. It was desperation wrapped in hope. Her parents' expressions shifted from surprise to cautious evaluation. They asked questions. Where did I work? What were my plans? How long had we known each other? I answered carefully, aware that each sentence was building a future that hadn't existed an hour ago. Ariba didn't look at me while she spoke. She kept her eyes on her tea, as if afraid I might disappear if she turned too quickly. When I left that afternoon, the sky was painfully blue. Children were riding bicycles down the street. Life outside her house felt ordinary, but something inside me had shifted. She walked me to the gate and apologized before I could say anything. She said she just needed space from the pressure. She said she trusted me. She said she didn't know who else to ask. I should have been angry. I should have felt used. Instead, I felt something else. Something softer. Something frightening. Because when she had said the word boyfriend, my heart had reacted before my mind could protest. Over the next few days, we pretended it was temporary. A harmless arrangement. A story we would quietly dissolve once the pressure eased. But her parents began inviting me for lunch. Her mother asked about my favorite foods. Her father started discussing career plans as if I were already woven into their family's future. And slowly, dangerously, the lie began to feel less like a shield and more like a possibility. But I was terrified. I had spent years avoiding emotional risk. I had watched my own parents' marriage fracture under silent resentments and unmet expectations. I had promised myself I would never step into something unless I was certain. And certainty had always felt like a myth. Ariba, however, was changing. The more time we spent together under the gaze of her family, the more real we became outside of it. We started taking long daytime walks through the botanical gardens. We shared ice cream under the sun. She told me about the nights she cried from feeling behind in life. I told her about my fear of being ordinary forever. She didn't judge my fears. She listened to them as if they were fragile glass. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through tall trees and painted patterns on the pavement, I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. I was falling. But falling meant choosing. And choosing meant asking the question that had been building inside me like pressure in a sealed room. A week after that first Sunday, I asked her to meet me at the park where we first met. It was midday. Families were picnicking. The world felt bright and forgiving. She arrived in a soft blue dress, her hair catching the light. She looked hopeful. That terrified me more than anything. We sat on the same patch of grass where she had convinced a child to believe in dinosaurs and stories. I took a long breath and asked the question I had been afraid of since she spoke that word in her living room. I asked her if I was the someone. Not the temporary solution. Not the convenient name to silence proposals. Not the shield against pressure. I asked her if I was the someone she saw when she imagined her future. The silence that followed felt endless, though it was only seconds. Her eyes filled with something that wasn't fear. It was relief. She told me she hadn't planned to fall for me. She told me the lie had started as protection, but somewhere between shared coffees and late-night messages about books, I had become real to her. She told me she didn't want to lose me if I decided this was too much. And that was the moment I understood the real challenge wasn't convincing her parents. It was overcoming my own fear of vulnerability. Love, I realized, wasn't certainty. It was courage. I told her I was scared. I told her I didn't know how to promise perfection. But I also told her that when she said boyfriend, something inside me hoped she meant it. The wind moved softly around us. Children laughed in the distance. The world didn't pause dramatically. It just continued, as if reminding us that life doesn't wait for perfect timing. We decided to stop pretending. The next time I visited her house, there was no performance. I told her parents the truth. That it had started unexpectedly. That we were still figuring it out. That I cared for their daughter deeply, but I wanted to earn whatever future we built. Her father listened quietly. Her mother watched Ariba's face more than mine. After a long moment, her father nodded and said something simple. He said real things take time, and time reveals intention. It wasn't a blessing. But it wasn't rejection either. And that was enough. The months that followed weren't dramatic or cinematic in obvious ways. They were filled with ordinary days. Job interviews. Volunteer events. Small arguments about schedules. Quiet afternoons spent planning possibilities. We grew not through grand gestures, but through consistency. I learned that she drank her tea without sugar when she was stressed. She learned that I went silent when I felt overwhelmed. Instead of letting silence become distance, she would sit beside me until I spoke. We built something patient. There were moments when old fears resurfaced. Nights when I questioned whether I was ready. Days when she worried she had forced something too quickly. But each time, we returned to that park in our minds, the place where truth had replaced pretense. 1 year later, on another bright Sunday afternoon, I stood in her living room again. The sunlight was just as golden. The tea smelled the same. But this time, there was no lie in the air. Her father asked about my long-term plans. I answered honestly, not impressively. Her mother brought sweets and smiled in a way that felt warmer than before. And Ariba looked at me not with hope, but with certainty. I didn't have a ring. I didn't have a rehearsed speech. I simply reached for her hand, the same way she had reached for mine that first Sunday. The difference was that this time, I wasn't holding it out of obligation or confusion. I was holding it because I knew. Before I end this story, I want to say something to you. If this journey touched your heart, if you've ever been afraid to choose love because you feared being hurt, please like this video, share it with someone who needs courage, and subscribe so we can continue telling stories that remind us we are not alone. And here's a special request before the ending. Comment the word courage below if you believe love is a choice worth making despite the fear. Because sometimes the most powerful relationships don't begin with certainty. They begin with a mistake, a lie told out of desperation, and a question asked in daylight. Am I the someone? That question changed everything. It turned a shield into a promise. It turned fear into intention. It turned two in between people into partners willing to grow. And if there is one thing I learned under that bright Sunday sun, it is this: being the someone doesn't mean being perfect. It means being willing. Willing to stay. Willing to try. Willing to build something real in the open light of day. She told her parents I was her boyfriend. And in asking if I was the someone, I finally became him.